So what we know, for instance, that most cases of violence, intergroup conflict, and political murders, which happened in Turkey in the last 30 years, and there are many of them, I'll just cite a few, did not just happen out of the blue. They were planned, instigated, and executed by these guardians and their collaborators. Obviously, the kind of the killing of almost 40,000 people in the Kurdish war and its escalation did not happen just by itself. We know for sure that thousands, actually, about hundreds of Kurdish intellectuals and activists were killed in the 80s and 90s. And what we see at the moment, I mean, this is pretty shocking. But you know, every day there's articles in Turkish newspapers at the moment about human remains being found in the Kurdish southeast with the remains of Kurdish activists, hundreds of them being found in these days. But also you have like a large number of political murders of critical Turkish intellectuals and activists in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. Especially of those who were writing about the guardians and the deep state, and who were basically, were killed by unresolved murders. There are hundreds of unresolved murders still in today's Turkey. And when we move closer to today, we don't... Yes, but most importantly, none of them are resolved. There's not a single of these hundreds of political murders which have been resolved by the judicial system, which obviously you know, makes one wonder whether the judicial system actually is able to deal with these issues. Now, when we move closer to the 2000s, we're not talking about these kinds of large-scale political murders anymore. But we have the murders of Christian missionaries in the mid-2000s, for instance. And finally, well, probably something you will have heard about here, the murder of Turkish Armenian journalist Şentink in 2007. And that really was employed to disrupt the liberalization of the public debate on Turkish history, on historical conflict, which had been encouraged by Turkey's EU membership perspective and the liberalization of the political space. But we now know almost for sure that he was murdered by people acting within orders from parts of the state. Now, based on the exploration of these and many other incidents, I come to the following conclusion, and that's probably what you can take away from this talk today. It is the manipulative nature of the guardian state that is at the root of the massive polarization of the political system of Turkey, despite the fact that civil society has become much more organized and vocal in the last few years, and that is important. I also believe that the violence and behind-the-scenes meddling really accounts for much of the anger in the political system of Turkey. I mean, you asked me today over lunch, you know, why angry? And then you said provocative. Well, you know, if you look at 40,000 people killed there, a few hundred there, then like dozens of intellectuals there, of course, you know, that builds up and that poisons your memory. And of course, when you go further back in history, there's more there too, in terms of traumatic experiences. But it does poison your everyday life, and that's, I think, where we stand at the moment. And I think the years between 2002 and 2005 were actually an exception. You know, when the Justice and Development Party had just come into power and the European Union accession perspective was firmly in place. The government had to deliver. And I think there was a real deepening of the rule of law, a strengthening of human rights, and of opening of the political space. But since 2005, there really has been a stagnation, and that has a lot to do with how the European Union really kind of started to look at Turkey. Now, but is Turkey really all about anger and violence, about political manipulations, and you know, a state interested in preservation and perpetuation? I would not want you to kind of leave with that kind of impression. And obviously, when you look from a Greek perspective, Turkey's economic rise is quite noticeable. And indeed, despite the viciousness of the political system, the polarization of the political field, and all that, the economic liberalization since the Özal era has changed the country massively. Economic growth has continued at a rate of at least 5 to 6% and above. Of course, this has been a growth which was characterized by cycles of boom and bust, by massive crises. 2001 was a crisis where Turks basically overnight lost 20 to 30% of their income and their savings. And anyway, boom and bust is something which is also something quite close to your daily experience here, I guess. Regional development disparities, especially in the Kurdish East, continue, and there is poverty and all that. But anyone who has been to Turkey in the last decade will not fail to note how much the experience of everyday life has changed for the vast majority of Turkey. I mean, you have the transformation of formerly insignificant trading towns like Kayseri or Denizli or Kahramanmaraş, who have become thriving industrial cities which are socially conservative but which operate with an export base and global outreach which is truly impressive. Impoverished border areas have been transformed thanks to free travel between neighboring countries, especially with Syria. And the middle classes and general levels of wealth have massively expanded. In fact, I think one could go as far as to say that the society has changed from an elite society with a small Western-leaning middle class that was really running the show to a mass society which is very much shaped in this dual image of conservatism and economic progress which the ruling party has provided. There's a growing civil society. Many groups, in fact, have been challenging militarist and patriarchal structures of society in modern Turkey. And there are more and more citizen initiatives which have moved beyond this traditional fixation of the state as provider of all services and everything. In terms of cultural production, there's a lot to say. I think the dire years of the post-coup environment and also the straitjacket of Kemalist modernity are long over. Turkey has never been as productive as it is now, whether it's film, literature, art, music, and also TV series, which I understand are being watched in Greece as well. So Istanbul today is one of the culturally most intriguing places in Europe, I think, but not only in Europe. 3 minutes, I'm almost there. I'm in the Middle East. And I think it has recaptured at least part of its former cosmopolitan feel. Obviously, the Politis, the Istanbul, Rum, they have almost disappeared. But I think there is now this movement of Neopolitis, of people coming from Greece to settle and work in Istanbul, and that's an exciting thing which 20 years ago nobody would have imagined. And yet, we're far from the point where the anger would begin to subside. And when we look at the story about the massive progress and dynamism of Turkey, we also need to remember like the really kind of dark sides of this experience with which it has always come. In fact, the struggle between guardians and elected representatives is not over. It continues, this time with the Justice and Development Party as main protagonist. And history seems to be repeating itself a bit. As in the late 1950s under Menderes, for instance, it seems that the challenges of the guardians seem to be reverting to the mindset of the methods of their tormentors. And without the anchor of EU accession, there doesn't seem to be a very strong push for further democratic reform, and the anchor of the EU does not look very functional at the moment. So the debate continues really whether Turkey is a pole of dynamism in its region, or whether it could become a model for the Arab world, for instance, which is said a lot these days. And for now, I can assure you, the country is not becoming yet a liberal democracy. There's no kind of thoroughly liberal political space emerging out of these cycles of liberalization and then ruptures of extreme polarization. But Turkey, I think, remains to cast a spell over us with its peculiar combination of social and economic dynamism on the one side, and a political system permeated by authoritarian reflexes on the other. In Angry Nation, I'm trying to paint Turkey's recent past as it has been shaped by these dynamics. It's a theater play or imagined as a theater play that is dominated by the guardians who lurk behind the stage, the polarization which sets the scene, and the drama that unfolds on the screen. And it is this unfolding drama that I'm trying to capture in Angry Nation, and that informs my perspective on Turkey, and I hope you will share that perspective. Thank you.
very much, Kerem. We have plenty of time to entertain some questions. I can kickstart the discussion. I have at least time, but I will limit myself. Revisiting some of the issues that you mentioned, I wanted, in very simple, almost simplistic terms, to ask you if this cycle of boom and bust is over, and if Turkey is ready to look forward to a future to a booming future, as it is often described. If this guardian state is still in place and how powerful it is today, where does Erdogan fit in that story? The most successful politician after Kemal, one might say. At least the longest serving, in a sense, although the leader, I don't know, continuously serving, let's say. So where does Erdogan fit in that story? Obviously against the guardian state, but how much of a liberal? There is such a huge debate in the West. Fourthly, there is a debate already raging, not only in Israel, but in America itself, about who lost Turkey and why. Losing Turkey. Are we losing Turkey? Are we in danger of losing Turkey? Or is this a fake story? And finally, what does this all mean for the neighborhood? What does it mean for the Middle Eastern neighborhood of Turkey, or the Balkan or Caucasus neighborhood, and what does it mean for Greece? Okay. Because we are here in Salonika, people are excited and nervous at the same time about this new Turkey. So what does this whole angry and anger management of Turkey means for us on that side of the border?
Right, so that was one question. Okay, I'll give my best. I'm sorry for that. Okay, like the question about boom and bust, and especially in terms of the economy. If you were a Marxist, you would say boom and bust is part of capitalism, so you can't get capitalism without boom and bust, and you know, that's what you probably have to do. So, no, I mean, obviously, I guess that's what I'm also trying to say in the book. I mean, if there's one thing which is absent from Turkey's recent past, it's a sense of stability. I mean, you had probably the most stable years were the last 10 years under the Justice and Development Party, but the moment you kind of zoom into those years, it's like full with like massive kind of scandals, like a number of court cases which involve like leading kind of names from the army and from all segments of the state, which is a very destabilizing thing, and obviously it shows also a lot of fluctuations in the foreign policy, on the foreign policy side. So you know, in the relations with Israel, for instance. Certainly, I think the kind of this conflicted sense, the boom and bust, is there to stay. Because the guardian state is, of course, still there. I mean, it's, the current government has dismantled part of it, and it all started as a rather exciting experiment, which was very much supported by the liberals. It looked as if the Justice and Development Party would want to dismantle the guardian state and lead Turkey into a context where you do not have unelected guardians actually shaping policy. And that, I think, was a credible possibility as long as the European Union perspective was in place. You know, the idea that Turkey would become a liberal political, would become a liberal state was thinkable, was possible with the EU perspective. Without the EU perspective, that is much less likely, and it seems that the government has lost its interest in really kind of getting to the basis of what really this guardian state is.